She had always seemed like someone out of place, a quiet figure who moved through the chaos of boot camp like she didn't quite belong, her small frame and soft voice making her an easy target for skepticism from the drill instructors and her fellow recruits, many of whom openly doubted she would even last through training. Her name was Lena Hart, and at 22 she carried herself with the reserved demeanor of someone who had grown up being underestimated, her calm brown eyes betraying little emotion as she pushed through every obstacle that came her way. She didn't have the hardened jawline or muscular frame of the other women in her unit. Instead, she looked like she had wandered in from a college library or a quiet suburban home, yet there was something in the way she clenched her jaw and refused to falter that hinted at a deeper strength few had the patience to see. On the rifle range, she struggled at first, her shots scattering wildly across the target sheet, earning sharp reprimands and sarcastic remarks from the sergeants who told her she'd never make it, but she didn't flinch at their words. Each night, while the others slept, she stayed up cleaning her weapon over and over, practicing her stance in the dark, whispering breathing techniques to herself until her arms ached and her shoulders screamed. Within weeks, her shots tightened into neat clusters, and the same instructors who had mocked her began to raise their brows in grudging respect. But training was just the beginning, and she knew that the real test would come in combat, a reality she tried not to think about even as she packed her gear and boarded a roaring military plane that would carry her and her unit to a distant desert where the sky burned with unrelenting sun and the nights bit with icy winds. From the moment her boots touched the dusty soil of that foreign land, she felt the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears pressing down on her chest, but she kept her face impassive, because showing fear was a luxury none of them could afford. Her unit was tasked with long-range reconnaissance and escort missions, and it was on one such mission that she first saw death up close. A roadside bomb erupted beneath the lead vehicle of their convoy, flipping it into the air like a toy and showering the road with smoke, debris, and the deafening sound of chaos. Her ears rang as she ducked behind the armored side of their truck, heart pounding, but training took over before panic could. She sprinted forward under cover fire, dragging one of the wounded soldiers out of the wreckage, ignoring the searing pain in her own leg where shrapnel had torn through her pants and into her flesh. The smell of burning fuel and blood was thick in the air, but she didn't stop until she had pulled 2 men to safety, applying pressure to their wounds with trembling hands even as bullets whistled overhead. That day she earned her first Purple Heart, though she refused to let anyone see her cry as medics patched her up in the field hospital. She walked out of that tent on crutches, refusing evacuation, and rejoined her team the next morning, her face pale but her eyes determined, earning her the nickname Iron Heart from the squad leader, a grizzled veteran who had once bet she wouldn't survive her first firefight. Over the next year, Lena became the quiet backbone of her unit, her name whispered with respect by those who had once dismissed her. She carried heavy packs without complaint, volunteered for the most dangerous assignments, and always moved like she had nothing to lose, her bravery inspiring even the toughest men in her squad. It was during a night operation in a hostile village that she earned her second medal. The mission was supposed to be simple: extract an informant and exfiltrate before dawn. But things went wrong quickly when they were ambushed by insurgents with superior numbers, forcing the team to barricade themselves in a crumbling house while gunfire erupted outside like fireworks. The squad leader was hit in the chest and chaos threatened to overtake them all, but Lena crawled through the dark, dragging him to cover while calmly coordinating their defense, her steady voice cutting through the panic like a knife. She took over command, rallying her team to hold their ground until air support arrived, and when their ammunition ran low, she personally led a breakout, sprinting across open ground to retrieve ammo from a fallen comrade's pack, bullets tearing up the dirt around her feet. They held the line until dawn, and though her hands shook with exhaustion afterward, she remained calm as medics loaded the wounded onto helicopters, her face streaked with blood and dust. Her courage that night saved 6 lives, and she was decorated once again, though she deflected all praise, shrugging it off with the quiet humility that had become her signature. As the months dragged on, Lena's reputation grew, not because she was loud or commanding, but because she was always there, steady as stone, a constant presence in the swirling storm of war. Her 3rd and 4th Purple Hearts came from missions so dangerous that even hardened soldiers hesitated to speak of them. One during a rescue of civilians trapped in a bombed-out building, where she shielded a child with her own body as shrapnel tore through her back, and another during a night raid in the mountains, where she held her position alone against advancing enemies while her team evacuated a wounded comrade. Each time, she returned from the brink of death with that same calm expression, refusing evacuation, patching herself up, and moving forward as if pain were a minor inconvenience. By the time she was nearing the end of her second deployment, Lena was a legend among her peers, though she still looked like a beginner to outsiders. Small, quiet, unassuming. She didn't carry herself like a hero, didn't boast about her medals or exploits, and when people asked her how she'd managed to survive so much, she simply shrugged and said, "I was just doing my job." But those who had fought beside her knew the truth. Lena Hart wasn't just doing her job, she was rewriting what courage looked like, proving that strength wasn't about size or bravado, but about the quiet resolve to keep going when everything around you was falling apart. Her fifth medal came during what should have been a routine patrol, one that turned into an ambush so deadly it nearly wiped out her squad. She was hit twice in the first volley of gunfire but refused to go down, dragging herself into cover and returning fire with lethal precision, covering her team's retreat until reinforcements arrived. Even when her vision blurred and her body threatened to give out, she stayed conscious long enough to ensure her squad was safe, whispering orders into her radio with a voice so steady her comrades later said they thought she was uninjured. She woke up in a hospital weeks later, her body stitched and bandaged, medals waiting on her bedside table, but she didn't see herself as a hero. To her, she was still that girl who had struggled to hold a rifle straight on her first day of training, still the quiet recruit who everyone had underestimated. And yet, despite everything, she had become something no one could ignore. A soldier who had faced death 5 times and walked away every time, not because she was fearless, but because she knew that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the refusal to let it win. The weeks following her 5th injury were a haze of sterile hospital lights and the quiet beeping of machines, but Lena's mind was never still, her thoughts always drifting back to the desert roads and ruined villages where her squad still fought without her, and every time a doctor told her she needed more time to heal, she would clench her fists beneath the thin blanket, her jaw tight with frustration. She hated lying in bed, hated the way her body felt like it had been stitched together from broken pieces, but more than anything she hated the gnawing guilt that she was safe while others were still out there risking their lives, her absence leaving a void in the team she had come to see as her family. Her recovery was slow and grueling, each physical therapy session a brutal test of willpower, and though the doctors praised her progress, they warned her that her body was nearing its limit, that she might never regain her full strength. Lena listened in silence, her face unreadable, but deep down she had already made up her mind. She would return to the field no matter the cost. The paperwork was endless, full of evaluations and assessments from skeptical officers who questioned whether she was fit for duty, but she pushed through every obstacle with the same quiet determination she had shown in combat, and eventually she was cleared to rejoin her unit. When she arrived back at the forward operating base, the reaction from her comrades was overwhelming. Hardened men who had seen too much war greeted her with genuine smiles and firm embraces, and her squad leader, now fully recovered from the wound she had saved him from months earlier, saluted her with a rare show of respect, calling her the toughest soldier I've ever met. Lena said nothing, merely nodded and went straight to the armory to check her gear, her hands steady as she ran through her rifle inspection like she had never left. The war hadn't gotten any easier in her absence. In fact, the region had grown more volatile, with enemy forces growing bolder, ambushing patrols and launching assaults on supply convoys with ruthless efficiency. But Lena wasn't afraid. She moved through missions with the calm precision of someone who had already faced death enough times to no longer fear it, and her presence alone seemed to steady the nerves of younger soldiers, many of whom looked up to her like a silent guardian. Despite her reputation, she never sought recognition, never spoke of her medals or her injuries, and when new recruits asked her how she had earned so many honors, she would simply tell them to focus on their training, because medals didn't matter if you couldn't keep your team alive. Her leadership grew more natural with each mission, and though she still officially served under a squad leader, there were countless times when Lena became the de facto commander, making split-second decisions in firefights that saved lives. One such mission came just weeks after her return, when her squad was tasked with providing security for an engineering team repairing a bridge vital for supply lines. The operation seemed simple enough, but Lena had a nagging feeling of unease as they approached the site, her instincts sharpened by years of ambushes and close calls. She scanned the surrounding hills constantly, her eyes narrowing at a cluster of rocks that seemed slightly out of place. Without hesitation, she signaled her team to halt and take cover, and moments later, a hidden IED detonated exactly where they would have been standing, shaking the ground with a deafening roar. Gunfire erupted from the hills and chaos descended upon the squad, but Lena was already in motion, barking clear, concise orders as she crawled to a better vantage point, returning fire with deadly accuracy. She spotted the glint of a sniper's scope in the distance and dropped him with a single shot, then coordinated a flanking maneuver with 2 other soldiers, moving with the calm precision of a seasoned tactician. The firefight lasted over an hour, but by the time reinforcements arrived, Lena's squad had secured the bridge and neutralized the ambushers, sustaining only minor injuries thanks to her quick thinking. Her commanding officer later told her that her actions had saved dozens of lives that day, but Lena simply shrugged, her face expressionless, and went back to cleaning her weapon. The war dragged on, each day blending into the next, but Lena's resolve never wavered. She had become a symbol to those around her, proof that courage and resilience were not about bravado but about showing up, mission after mission, no matter the pain or fear. Yet beneath her stoic exterior, Lena carried scars no one could see, memories of faces she couldn't save, of nights spent crouched in bombed-out buildings with blood on her hands and the distant echo of enemy gunfire haunting her dreams. She never spoke of these memories, not even to her closest friends, but they shaped her into someone unbreakable, someone who had learned that survival was both a gift and a burden. One night, during a rare moment of quiet, her squad was stationed at an outpost near the border, and Lena found herself sitting alone beneath the stars, her rifle resting across her knees as she stared into the darkness. A young private approached her, his face pale with exhaustion, and asked her how she managed to stay so calm, how she found the courage to face danger day after day. Lena didn't answer immediately. She simply watched the horizon, her mind drifting back to her first day of training, to the voices that had told her she wouldn't make it. Finally, she looked at him and said softly, "You don't find courage. You make a choice. You choose to keep going even when you're terrified, even when it hurts. That's all it is." The private nodded, her words sinking in, and Lena returned her gaze to the horizon, her expression unreadable. The war would take many more months, perhaps years, but she had already decided that she would see it through to the end, no matter what it cost her. She had come into the military as a quiet, underestimated recruit, but now she was something else entirely. A soldier forged in fire, her reputation whispered among her peers like a legend. And though she still looked like a beginner to strangers, those who had fought beside her knew better. They knew that behind her calm eyes was a heart that had faced death 5 times and kept beating, a spirit that refused to break, and a soldier who would always be the first to step forward when danger came, not because she craved glory, but because she couldn't stand by while others suffered. In her mind, she wasn't a hero, she was simply Lena Hart, a girl who had once been underestimated, now carrying the weight of a war on her shoulders without complaint, driven by a quiet promise she had made to herself long ago, that she would never let fear decide her fate. The next mission would test Lena in ways even she hadn't anticipated, pushing her already battered body and mind to their absolute limit, and it began with what seemed like a straightforward assignment: provide security for a humanitarian convoy delivering medical supplies to a remote village deep in hostile territory, an area known for frequent ambushes and unpredictable roadside bombs. Lena's instincts prickled with unease as soon as she read the mission brief, her mind cataloging every risk, every vulnerable stretch of road they would have to cross, but she kept her concerns to herself, focusing instead on preparation, checking her rifle 3 times, packing extra ammunition, and ensuring every member of her squad knew the plan in detail. The convoy set out before dawn, the rumble of armored vehicles echoing across the barren landscape as they wound their way through narrow dirt roads flanked by rocky hills that seemed perfect for an ambush. Lena rode in the lead vehicle, her eyes scanning every ridge and shadow, her senses tuned so sharply that she could almost feel the tension in the air, that eerie stillness that often came before violence. It happened suddenly, a deafening explosion tearing through the convoy as a hidden IED detonated beneath the third vehicle, sending shrapnel and smoke into the sky, followed by a hail of gunfire from the surrounding hills. Lena's instincts took over instantly. She shouted orders into her radio, directing her squad to fan out and establish a defensive perimeter while she leapt from her vehicle, her boots hitting the dirt hard as she sprinted toward the wrecked transport. The screams of wounded soldiers filled her ears, but she didn't hesitate, dragging a bloodied medic out of the burning vehicle while bullets kicked up dust around her feet. She returned fire with precise bursts, dropping an attacker perched on a hill, then pulled another soldier to safety, her muscles screaming with effort as adrenaline drove her forward. Explosions rattled the ground as RPGs slammed into the road, and chaos consumed the convoy, but Lena moved like a machine, calm and efficient, her mind running calculations even as she ducked behind a destroyed truck for cover. The enemy had them pinned down, and it was clear this wasn't a random attack. It was an ambush designed to wipe them out completely. Lena grabbed her radio and coordinated a counterattack, calling for air support while ordering 2 soldiers to flank left and create a distraction. She provided covering fire, her rifle steady as she picked off targets with surgical precision, her body moving on instinct honed by years of combat. When a mortar shell landed dangerously close, throwing her to the ground and knocking the wind out of her, she forced herself up, ignoring the ringing in her ears and the sharp pain in her ribs. She crawled to a wounded soldier lying in the open, dragging him back to cover just as another volley of gunfire rained down. Her squad followed her lead, their movements sharp and coordinated, and slowly they began to turn the tide, driving the attackers back with disciplined bursts of fire until the roar of helicopters thundered overhead, gunships unleashing devastation on the hills. The ambush had lasted less than 30 minutes, but it felt like hours, and when the dust settled, Lena was kneeling beside a dying soldier, her hands covered in blood as she tried to keep him alive, whispering words of comfort until his breathing stopped. Her face remained calm, but inside, her heart felt like it was being torn apart, another life slipping through her fingers despite her best efforts. She stood slowly, scanning the battlefield, counting her squad, making sure everyone else was accounted for, and only when she was certain of their safety did she allow herself to feel the ache in her chest, a weight she would carry forever. That night, back at the base, her squad gathered in silence, the loss of their comrade heavy in the air, but their eyes kept drifting toward Lena, their unspoken gratitude and respect evident. She didn't speak much, just sat quietly, cleaning her rifle with steady hands, her face illuminated by the soft glow of a lantern. She had saved more lives than anyone could count that day, but in her mind, all she could see was the one she couldn't save, the soldier's face haunting her dreams that night as she lay awake in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. War had a way of chipping away at a person's soul, of filling them with ghosts, and Lena was no exception, but instead of breaking under the weight, she used it as fuel, a reminder of why she fought so hard, why she refused to let fear control her. The following weeks were relentless, mission after mission, each one blurring into the next, but Lena never faltered, always the first to step into danger, always calm and focused, her reputation growing beyond her unit as stories of her courage spread through the ranks. Commanders began requesting her specifically for high-risk operations, and while most soldiers might have taken pride in such recognition, Lena felt only the weight of responsibility, the knowledge that every decision she made could mean the difference between life and death for her team. One night, during a particularly dangerous reconnaissance mission in the mountains, her squad found themselves trapped in a narrow valley as enemy fighters closed in from all sides. The firefight was brutal, the rocky terrain offering little cover, and casualties mounted quickly as bullets ricocheted off stone. Lena took control, crawling through dirt and rubble to position herself at a vantage point where she could provide suppressing fire, picking off enemies with ruthless precision. When their squad leader was hit, she didn't hesitate, taking command and ordering a fighting retreat while coordinating with air support over the radio. 4 hours, they fought tooth and nail, and by the time reinforcements arrived, Lena's uniform was soaked in sweat and blood, her arms trembling from exhaustion, but she never let her weapon drop until she was certain her team was safe. That night, as she sat alone in a makeshift bunker, her hands shaking slightly as she cleaned her rifle, she thought about how far she had come from the timid recruit who could barely hold a gun steady during training. She didn't see herself as fearless. On the contrary, she felt fear every time she stepped into battle, fear that she would fail her team, fear that she wouldn't make it home, but she had learned to carry that fear like a weapon, to use it to sharpen her senses to keep her alive. To her comrades she was a hero, a legend even, but in her own mind she was just Lena Hart, a soldier doing her duty one step at a time, one fight after another, because if she stopped, if she let herself rest for too long, the memories of those she had lost would consume her. And so, she kept moving forward, her body scarred and her spirit hardened, a living testament to what courage truly meant, not flashy or loud, but steady and unyielding, like steel forged in fire. The war had a way of erasing time, of making months feel like days and days feel like lifetimes, and for Lena, each sunrise brought not relief but the grim certainty that there would be another mission, another fight, another risk of not coming back, yet she carried that burden with the same quiet resolve that had defined her since her first day in uniform. Her squad had become her family, a group of hardened men and women who had seen too much, lost too much, and yet still trusted her more than anyone else, following her orders without hesitation because they had all witnessed how many times her instincts had saved them. She moved like a shadow in the field, calm under fire, her mind sharp even when exhaustion clawed at her bones, and though she never spoke much, her presence alone steadied those around her. By now, stories of her bravery had spread far beyond her unit, whispered in barracks and mess halls like some kind of legend. Iron Heart, the soldier who had earned 5 Purple Hearts and refused evacuation every time, who carried scars like medals and never backed down no matter the odds. Lena hated the attention. She wasn't in it for glory, and every medal she received felt heavy, Not because of pride but because it reminded her of the moments she'd earned them, of the pain, the blood, the faces of comrades who hadn't made it home. But no matter how heavy those memories became, she never allowed herself to falter. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see a hero. She saw someone tired, scarred, and human, but she also saw someone who had made a choice long ago, to protect her team at all costs, to never let fear dictate her actions. That choice was tested yet again when her squad was assigned to an operation deep in enemy territory, a mission so dangerous that their commanding officer had warned them only volunteers should participate. Every hand in her squad had gone up without hesitation, and Lena had simply nodded, loading her gear with a grim expression. The plan was to infiltrate a compound believed to house a high-ranking insurgent leader, gather intelligence, and exfiltrate before dawn. The approach was silent, their boots crunching softly against the dry earth as they crept through the darkness, every sense on high alert. Lena led the way, her rifle raised, her sharp eyes scanning every shadow, every rooftop. When they breached the compound, chaos erupted instantly, gunfire crackled from every direction and grenades exploded, filling the air with smoke and dust. Lena moved like a machine, her movements fluid as she guided her team through the chaos, clearing rooms and taking down threats with deadly precision. They found the target, bound him, and prepared to leave, but the enemy had anticipated their escape route, and soon they were pinned down, surrounded by fighters determined to wipe them out. The gunfight was relentless, bullets slamming into walls and ricocheting off metal as Lena crawled across the ground, barking orders, directing her team to secure a defensive perimeter. She spotted a weakness in the enemy's formation and decided to take the risk herself, sprinting across open ground to flank their attackers. Her boots pounded the dirt, her breath sharp in her ears, and bullets whistled past her head as she slid into cover, firing precise shots that tore holes in the enemy line. Her bold maneuver gave her squad the opening they needed, and they pushed forward, breaking through the encirclement and retreating to their extraction point. But the enemy wasn't done. A sudden barrage of RPG fire lit up the night sky, striking dangerously close and throwing Lena off her feet, her body slamming into the ground with bone-jarring force. She tasted blood but forced herself up, ignoring the sharp pain radiating through her ribs. She had no time to think about her injuries, she had to get her team out alive. She grabbed the radio, coordinating with the incoming helicopters, and led her squad through the chaos, dragging the wounded, firing back at shadows, and never once slowing down. When they finally reached the extraction zone, she was the last one to board the helicopter, collapsing into a seat as the aircraft lifted off, her vision blurring from exhaustion and pain, but she kept her rifle in her hands, ready for anything until they were safely back at base. The mission had been a success, but the cost was heavy. 2 soldiers injured and Lena herself sporting fresh wounds that would leave more scars. As the medics worked on her, she stared at the ceiling of the medical tent, her mind replaying every second of the battle, every decision she had made, and the weight of leadership pressed on her chest like a physical force. She didn't sleep that night, didn't even rest. She just sat outside under the stars, her rifle across her lap, her eyes scanning the darkness out of habit. The war had changed her in ways she couldn't explain, hardening her in some places while leaving her deeply vulnerable in others. She felt everything deeply, the loss of a comrade, the cries of civilians caught in the crossfire, the exhaustion of endless days without respite. But she had learned to bury those feelings deep enough to keep moving forward. Her squad relied on her, trusted her with their lives, and that trust gave her strength even when she felt she had nothing left to give. Weeks later, they were sent on another mission, this time to rescue a group of aid workers kidnapped by insurgents. It was supposed to be a quick in-and-out operation, but like so many things in war, it turned into a nightmare. The enemy had fortified their position, and as Lena's team approached under the cover of darkness, they were spotted. A firefight erupted, and the air was filled with the deafening roar of gunfire and explosions. Lena was at the front, leading the charge, her movements precise and fearless as she navigated the chaos. She kicked down doors, cleared rooms, and directed her squad with calm authority, even as bullets tore through the walls around her. They found the hostages tied up in a back room, terrified but alive, and Lena immediately began planning their extraction. But as they tried to retreat, the enemy launched a desperate counterattack, throwing everything they had at the squad. Lena fought like a woman possessed, covering her team as they escorted the civilians to safety, taking hit after hit but refusing to go down. She could feel the burn of shrapnel in her arm, the sting of cuts across her face, but she pushed through the pain, her focus razor-sharp. When they finally reached safety, Lena collapsed, her body giving out after hours of non-stop fighting, but even as medics rushed to her side, she tried to sit up, to check on her squad, to make sure they had all made it out alive. That was who she was. Someone who never thought of herself, only of her team, someone who had been underestimated from the start and had risen to become the kind of soldier others whispered about in awe. And as she lay there, staring at the night sky through half-lidded eyes, she felt no pride, only a deep, unshakable determination. No matter how many times she was wounded, no matter how heavy the scars became, she would keep fighting because she wasn't done yet, not until every person under her command made it home. Lena's body was breaking down long before she would admit it, each new mission etching more scars into her skin and more weight onto her soul, but she refused to let it slow her. Moving with the same relentless determination that had carried her through every firefight and ambush, her mind focused only on the soldiers at her side, because if she faltered, if she hesitated for even a second, it could cost them their lives. She carried herself with quiet authority now, no longer the unsure recruit who had once struggled with a rifle, but a leader whose calm presence steadied even the most terrified new recruits, and though she never sought command, her actions spoke louder than rank or medals ever could. Her reputation had grown far beyond her unit. Soldiers who had never met her spoke her name with respect, calling her Iron Heart, a legend who had survived more combat than most would see in a lifetime, but to Lena, those stories felt like they belonged to someone else. She didn't feel like a hero when she was crouched in a ditch under enemy fire, blood soaking through her fatigues. She didn't feel like a legend when she lay awake at night staring at the ceiling of a dusty barracks, hearing echoes of gunfire in her head. What kept her going wasn't glory or recognition, but a simple, unshakable promise she had made to herself, that she would do everything in her power to bring her team home alive. That promise was tested again during a mission to secure a small village that had been overrun by enemy fighters, a brutal operation that would haunt her for years to come. The mission began at dawn, her squad moving through the outskirts of the settlement with the precision of seasoned soldiers, their boots crunching softly on dirt roads littered with debris. The village was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that always set Lena on edge, and she raised her hand to signal a halt, scanning the area with sharp, calculating eyes. Moments later, the first shot rang out and chaos erupted. Enemy fighters poured out of buildings and alleyways, their gunfire tearing through the morning air, and Lena's squad scrambled for cover as bullets ripped through the walls around them. Lena didn't flinch. She barked orders into her radio, her voice steady as she directed her team to secure positions and return fire. She moved from cover to cover with lethal precision, her rifle snapping from target to target as she cleared a path for her squad to advance. The fighting was brutal, every street a battlefield, every corner a potential death trap, but Lena's mind was razor-sharp, calculating angles, spotting ambushes before they could spring, and keeping her soldiers alive through sheer instinct and experience. When one of her teammates was pinned down by enemy fire, Lena didn't hesitate. She sprinted across open ground, bullets kicking up dirt at her feet, and tackled him out of harm's way, dragging him into cover before returning fire with a ferocity that drove the attackers back. Her movements were a blur, her senses heightened, her body running on adrenaline and muscle memory, and by the time they secured the village square, her uniform was soaked with sweat and streaked with blood that wasn't all her own. But the battle wasn't over yet. As they pushed deeper into the village, they discovered that civilians were being held hostage inside one of the buildings, and Lena immediately devised a plan to rescue them. She led a small team to breach the building, moving with quiet precision through dark hallways, every nerve on edge. The air inside was thick with dust and the smell of gunpowder, and Lena could hear muffled sobs from a room ahead. She signaled her team to stack up on the door, then kicked it open, her rifle raised as she swept the room. The enemy fighters inside didn't have time to react. Lena's team dropped them in seconds, and she quickly ushered the terrified civilians to safety, her calm voice cutting through their panic as she guided them out of the building and into the arms of medics waiting outside. But there was no time to rest. The enemy was regrouping, launching a desperate counterattack that threatened to overwhelm them. Lena took position at the front, her rifle steady as she laid down suppressing fire, her sharp eyes scanning for weak points in their assault. She spotted an enemy marksman on a rooftop and dropped him with a single shot, then shifted her focus to another group trying to flank them, cutting them down with precise bursts. Her movements were fluid, efficient, honed by years of combat, and she pushed forward relentlessly, rallying her team with her calm determination. Hours passed in a blur of gunfire and explosions, and by the time the fighting died down, the village was secure, but Lena was exhausted, her body trembling from the effort of keeping herself alive through sheer willpower. She didn't let it show though. She walked through the rubble-strewn streets with her rifle at the ready, checking on her soldiers, offering quiet words of reassurance to those shaken by the battle. She didn't see herself as different from them. She felt fear just like they did, felt the weight of every trigger pull, every life taken, but she had learned to carry that weight with grace, to transform it into strength instead of letting it crush her. That night, as they set up a temporary base in the village, Lena sat alone on a piece of broken wall, staring at the stars as she cleaned her rifle. She thought about the civilians she had saved, the teammates she had protected, and the ones she hadn't been able to. Every mission left new scars, but each one also strengthened her resolve. She wasn't fighting for medals or recognition. She was fighting for the people beside her, for the civilians caught in the crossfire, for the belief that her sacrifices meant something. The whispers of her legend didn't matter to her. What mattered was that her squad trusted her with their lives, that they followed her into hell without hesitation because they knew she would always bring them home if it was humanly possible. She thought about her younger self, the girl who had struggled through boot camp, who had been mocked and doubted, and she wondered if that girl would even recognize the woman she had become. Probably not, Lena thought, because that girl had never imagined she would become a soldier who could lead men into battle, who could stand unflinching in the face of death, who could earn 5 Purple Hearts and still keep going. She wasn't fearless, she was just relentless, and that relentlessness had turned her into the kind of leader soldiers would follow through fire. She knew the war wasn't close to over, that there would be more missions, more battles, more losses, but she also knew she wouldn't stop. She had chosen this path and she would walk it to the end, no matter what it cost her. Lena had always believed that war didn't change you overnight. It reshaped you piece by piece, like a relentless sculptor carving away at stone, and by now there wasn't a part of her that hadn't been chiseled by the brutality of the battlefield, her once soft hands now calloused and scarred, her quiet demeanor hardened into steel. Yet beneath the armor she wore around her heart there was still a part of her that felt every loss, every scream, every explosion that rattled the earth beneath her boots. She carried those memories like weight in her rucksack, never speaking of them but never forgetting them either, and that weight made her sharper, faster, more protective of those under her command. The soldiers who fought alongside her knew she was different. She wasn't loud or brash like some leaders, she didn't bark orders for show or swagger into firefights trying to prove something, she was calm, almost eerily so, moving with precision and purpose as if every action had been rehearsed 1,000 times. That calmness was contagious. It steadied the green recruits who had never seen combat before, and even the veterans who had spent years in the field found themselves trusting her instincts without question. It was this trust that carried them through one of the deadliest missions of her career, a mission that began with a simple objective: secure a vital mountain pass that enemy forces had been using to transport weapons. The terrain was treacherous, the air thin and biting cold, and Lena's squad spent 3 days hiking through rocky trails, their breath visible in the frigid night air, every step careful as they moved like ghosts through the mountains. She led from the front, as always, her eyes scanning every shadow, every crevice where an ambush could be waiting, and when they finally reached the pass she immediately sensed something was wrong. The silence was too heavy, too absolute, and her gut screamed danger. She raised her fist to halt the squad, crouched low, and peered through her scope, her sharp eyes catching the faint glint of metal buried beneath the snow. In that instant she knew they were walking into a trap. Her voice was calm but firm as she signaled her team to retreat, but they had only taken a few steps back when the first explosion ripped through the mountainside, shaking the ground and showering them with snow and rock. Enemy fighters emerged from hidden positions, their rifles spitting fire, and chaos erupted as Lena's squad scrambled for cover. The ambush was expertly planned, with machine guns positioned on high ground and mortar rounds raining down from above, but Lena didn't panic. She crawled behind a boulder, her rifle pressed to her shoulder, and began picking off targets with precise shots, her mind calculating every move. She radioed for reinforcements, her voice calm despite the deafening noise around her, and then she moved, darting from cover to cover, rallying her squad and coordinating their defense. She spotted a group of enemy fighters trying to flank them and quickly shifted position, taking them out before they could get close, her hands steady even as bullets cracked past her head. Hours felt like minutes as the firefight raged on, the cold air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and blood. Lena's squad was outnumbered, outgunned, but her leadership turned what could have been a massacre into a brutal stalemate. She crawled through snow and dirt to reach a wounded soldier, dragging him to safety while laying down suppressing fire with one hand, and when an enemy grenade landed nearby, she grabbed it without hesitation and hurled it back, the explosion shaking the ground just seconds later. Her uniform was soaked in blood, some hers, some not, but she never slowed down, her mind locked into a state of pure focus that bordered on terrifying. Reinforcements finally arrived after what felt like an eternity, helicopters roaring overhead and unleashing hell on the enemy positions. But Lena didn't relax even then. She stayed in position, scanning the ridges through her scope, making sure her team had a clear path out. By the time the battle ended, the mountain pass was littered with spent shell casings, shattered weapons and bodies, and Lena's squad was battered but alive, every one of them owing their survival to her leadership. When the medics tried to pull her away to tend to the deep gash on her shoulder and the bullet graze along her ribs, she waved them off, choosing instead to walk the battlefield, counting her squad one by one, making sure no one was left behind. Only when she was certain that every soldier was accounted for did she allow herself to sit down, her body trembling from exhaustion, her breath fogging in the icy air. That night, back at the base, she cleaned her rifle in silence, her expression unreadable as she replayed the battle in her mind, every shot, every decision, every moment where things could have gone differently. She didn't celebrate the victory, she didn't feel like a hero. All she felt was the heaviness of survival, the knowledge that she would have to do it all over again tomorrow, and the quiet satisfaction that her team had made it out alive. But the war had a way of never giving her time to rest. Within days she was deployed again, this time on a mission to intercept a weapons convoy in enemy-controlled territory. It was a high-risk operation, requiring stealth and precision, and Lena was chosen to lead because no one else could be trusted to pull it off. She and her team moved under the cover of night, slipping through dense forests and rocky hills, their boots silent on the uneven ground. Lena's senses were razor-sharp, every sound amplified, every rustle of leaves sending a jolt of adrenaline through her veins. They ambushed the convoy at dawn, hitting fast and hard, Lena at the front as always, her rifle barking in controlled bursts as she led the charge. The firefight was intense, but Lena's calm leadership and flawless execution turned it into a swift victory. Within minutes, the convoy was neutralized, and her squad was securing crates of weapons that would never reach enemy hands. As the sun rose over the battlefield, Lena stood with her rifle slung across her shoulder, her breath visible in the cold morning air, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of reinforcements. She didn't feel pride or relief, she felt the familiar weight settling on her chest, the quiet understanding that this was just another step in a long bloody road, and that her job was far from done. Her body ached, her scars throbbed, but her resolve never wavered. She had come so far from the timid recruit who had once struggled to meet her drill instructor's eyes. Now she was the one others looked to in their darkest moments, the one who walked into fire without hesitation, not because she was fearless but because she couldn't bear the thought of anyone else getting hurt. And as she led her squad back to base, her rifle in hand, her boots crunching softly on the frost-covered ground, she felt the weight of every life she had saved, every battle she had fought, and every choice she had made, carrying it all like armor, because she knew the war wasn't close to over, and neither was she. Lena had learned to live with exhaustion as if it were a constant shadow, an old companion that never left her side, but even she felt the strain of months of back-to-back missions. Without real rest, her body a map of bruises and scars, her mind a fortress that had been tested so often it felt unbreakable, and yet every time she strapped on her gear and stepped into the transport, she felt the same quiet pulse of fear deep in her chest, a reminder that she was still human, still mortal, and still walking willingly into the jaws of death. Her squad had come to rely on her in a way that went beyond the chain of command. To them, she wasn't just a leader, she was the shield between them and oblivion, the one who kept her head when chaos erupted, who could find calm in the middle of hell, and that trust had become both a burden and a source of strength. She carried their faith like another weapon, a reason to push through every injury, every sleepless night, every moment when her hands shook after the adrenaline wore off, and it was that same unwavering commitment that earned her assignment to a mission so dangerous it was whispered about even among hardened veterans. To infiltrate and sabotage an enemy stronghold deep behind enemy lines, a fortified compound carved into the side of a canyon, bristling with heavy weaponry and guarded by elite fighters. It was a suicide mission on paper, but Lena didn't flinch when the orders came down. She simply nodded, studied the intel, and began planning every step with meticulous precision, her mind already calculating angles of attack, escape routes, and contingencies. She selected a small strike team she trusted with her life, moving like a ghost through the base as they prepared, their faces grim but determined. The night they deployed was moonless, the world cloaked in darkness as the helicopter flew low over the mountains, its rotors thumping a steady rhythm that matched the beat of Lena's heart. She sat in silence, checking her rifle one last time, her expression calm but her eyes sharp, scanning the terrain as they approached their drop point. The air was cold enough to bite, and when they rappelled down into the canyon, The wind howled like a living thing, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke from enemy campfires. Lena signaled her team forward, moving with practiced stealth along the canyon floor, every sense on high alert, her boots barely making a sound on the rocky ground. They reached the outer perimeter without detection, but Lena knew that was the easy part. The real challenge would come once they breached the compound. She crouched behind a boulder, peering through her scope to study the layout, marking guard positions and searchlights, and then she gave the signal. The team moved like phantoms, slipping past sentries and cutting through wire fences, their breaths shallow as they crept toward the first guard tower. Lena took the shot herself, her suppressed rifle whispering death as the guards slumped silently, and they advanced, clearing one position after another with clinical efficiency. Every step was a gamble, every breath a risk, but Lena's nerves were steady, her mind hyper-focused, her body moving with instinctive precision born of countless firefights. When they reached the compound walls, she signaled for explosives, and moments later a muffled blast tore open a section of reinforced concrete, the sound swallowed by the roar of the wind. They slipped inside, weapons raised, moving through dimly lit corridors that smelled of oil and gunpowder, the tension thick enough to choke on. Lena led the way, her rifle sweeping corners, her sharp eyes scanning every shadow for movement. They reached the control room without raising an alarm, and Lena quickly set to work planting charges on critical systems, her hands steady even as adrenaline coursed through her veins. The plan was simple but deadly: cripple the compound's communications and defenses, then exfiltrate before reinforcements could arrive. But war rarely goes according to plan, and as they moved toward the exit, a door burst open and enemy soldiers poured into the hallway, their rifles blazing. The silence of their infiltration shattered in an instant, replaced by deafening gunfire and shouted orders. Lena dove behind cover, her mind already calculating their next move as she fired back, her shots precise and lethal. She barked orders to her team, her voice cutting through the chaos as they fought their way through narrow hallways, grenades shaking the walls and sending debris raining down on them. Lena moved like a machine, every decision measured, every action deliberate, her body a blur of controlled violence as she cleared a path toward the breach they had created. She was the last one through, covering her team's retreat as bullets whizzed past her head, sparks flying off the wall beside her. Outside, the canyon erupted in chaos as alarms blared and searchlights swept across the terrain, enemy fighters flooding out of hidden entrances like ants defending their nest. Lena sprinted through the darkness, laying down suppressive fire, her movements smooth and deliberate even as exhaustion clawed at her muscles. She felt a searing pain in her leg as a bullet grazed her thigh, but she pushed forward, gritting her teeth, refusing to slow down. The charges detonated seconds later, a thunderous explosion lighting up the night sky and sending a shockwave through the canyon, fire and smoke billowing from the compound as its defenses crumbled. The blast threw enemy fighters into disarray, and Lena seized the moment, rallying her team to push through the confusion. They reached the extraction point under heavy fire, and Lena stayed at the rear, firing burst after burst to keep the enemy at bay until the helicopter swooped in, its rotors chopping the air as ropes dropped down. One by one her team climbed aboard, and Lena was the last to grab the rope, her muscles burning as she hauled herself up while tracer rounds zipped past. She swung herself into the chopper, panting, her face streaked with dirt and blood, but her eyes were steady as she gave the all-clear signal. As they lifted off, the canyon below was an inferno, the compound reduced to rubble, and Lena allowed herself a small nod of satisfaction. They had completed the mission, but the cost was etched into every bruise, every scrape, every exhausted expression on her team's faces. Back at base, she limped into the med bay, refusing to let the medics fuss over her until every one of her soldiers had been treated first. Only when they were all accounted for did she sit down and allow herself to be stitched up, her jaw clenched as the medic worked in silence. That night, Lena sat alone outside her barracks, staring up at the stars with a cigarette between her fingers, though she barely smoked it, just holding it like a ritual. She thought about how close they had come to dying, about the explosion's roar, the look in her soldiers' eyes as they fought through hell together, and she felt that familiar heaviness settle in her chest. She didn't see herself as fearless or invincible. She felt every brush with death, every scar on her body was a reminder of her mortality. But she also felt a strange sense of clarity, a deep understanding that this was who she was now, a soldier who walked into impossible situations and brought her people home. The Purple Hearts she'd been awarded didn't feel like medals. They felt like memorials, reminders of pain endured and sacrifices made. But even as her body ached and her mind replayed the mission over and over, Lena knew she would go out again tomorrow if called. Because that was her purpose now, the fire that drove her forward, to protect, to fight, and to lead. Lena awoke before dawn, her body aching as if every muscle had been twisted and burned, but she forced herself out of bed, her movements slow yet deliberate, the weight of her gear feeling heavier than ever as she strapped it on, because there was no time to rest, no time to indulge in pain, not when the war was still raging and her squad still needed her sharp, steady leadership to survive what was coming next, and though exhaustion pressed on her shoulders like a physical weight, her mind was clear, her purpose unshaken, her spirit as unyielding as steel forged in fire. The night before had been quiet, eerily so, the kind of silence that made soldiers restless because they knew it was only the calm before another storm, and as Lena walked toward the briefing room, her boots striking the metal floor with quiet rhythm, she felt that familiar tension coiling in her gut, the anticipation of another mission that would test her in ways she hadn't yet imagined. Inside the dimly lit room, maps and satellite images were spread across a large table, commanders speaking in hushed tones as they discussed the operation. Lena stood silently, her arms crossed, studying every detail with her sharp, calculating gaze. The target this time was a heavily fortified supply hub deep in enemy territory, a critical point in their logistics chain that, if destroyed, would cripple enemy movements across the region. The catch was that it was buried beneath a network of tunnels, guarded by automated turrets and a garrison of seasoned fighters, making a frontal assault impossible. The only option was infiltration, and naturally, Lena was chosen to lead because there was no one else trusted enough to carry out something this dangerous. She didn't react outwardly to the assignment, but inside she felt a flicker of grim resolve. This wasn't just another mission. This was a turning point, a strike that could shift the momentum of the war, and she intended to make sure it succeeded no matter what it cost her. Hours later, she was crouched in the belly of a transport vehicle with her squad, their faces illuminated only by dim red lights as they prepared for insertion, each soldier checking weapons and gear in tense silence. Lena sat with her back straight, rifle resting across her knees, her sharp eyes scanning each member of her team, silently assessing their readiness. She trusted them completely. They weren't just comrades, they were family forged in fire, and she knew that trust went both ways. They looked to her not for speeches or reassurance but for quiet confidence, and she gave it to them with a steady gaze, a small nod that said, "We'll get through this." When the ramp dropped, cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. They moved like shadows into the darkness, slipping through dense forest as Lena led them toward the hidden entrance of the tunnel system. The enemy had done everything to make this place impenetrable, but Lena had studied every satellite image, every intel report, memorizing patrol schedules and blind spots until she could navigate them in her sleep. They reached the perimeter undetected, and Lena signaled for her team to fan out, silently neutralizing sentries with suppressed weapons, their bodies dropping soundlessly into the underbrush. Every step forward was a dance with death, but Lena moved with fluid grace, her senses razor-sharp, every flicker of movement analyzed, every sound catalogued. When they reached the hidden hatch leading underground, she knelt, running her gloved fingers over the rusted metal before signaling her breacher, who quickly disabled the security locks. The hatch creaked open, revealing a narrow stairwell that descended into darkness. Lena was the first to move, her rifle raised, her heartbeat steady despite the danger waiting below. The air in the tunnels was damp and cold, the smell of oil and earth thick as they advanced in silence, every step deliberate. She signaled hand commands, guiding her team through a maze of passages lit by flickering bulbs, each intersection cleared with practiced precision. The deeper they went, the more tense the air felt, as if the tunnels themselves were holding their breath, and Lena's instincts screamed that they were walking into a trap. Sure enough, as they neared the supply hub, a motion sensor tripped, alarms blaring through the tunnels, red warning lights flashing to life, and in seconds the narrow corridors were filled with gunfire. Lena dove for cover, her voice calm but firm as she directed her squad, her orders cutting through the chaos as they engaged enemies pouring in from multiple directions. The fight was brutal, close-quarters combat turning the tunnels into a killing ground where every corner was a potential death trap. But Lena's presence steadied her team, her rifle spitting precise bursts as she moved with deadly efficiency. She threw a smoke grenade to cover their advance, then signaled her demolition expert to plant charges on a structural support column. Their mission wasn't to clear every enemy, it was to cripple the hub, and Lena knew speed was their only ally. They fought their way through a barrage of bullets, Lena's mind calculating every movement like a chess match, her instincts honed by countless battles guiding her through the chaos. At one point, a grenade bounced toward them and Lena didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, grabbed it, and hurled it back down the hallway just in time, the explosion rocking the tunnel and showering them with debris. Her ears rang, but she didn't slow down, dragging a wounded teammate to cover before pressing forward. They reached the central supply chamber, a cavernous space filled with crates of ammunition and fuel tanks, and Lena wasted no time signaling for the charges to be set. As her team worked, she covered them, her rifle steady, her breathing even despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Enemy reinforcements swarmed in, and Lena dropped them one by one, her movements fluid, mechanical, every shot deliberate. The moment the charges were armed, she gave the signal to retreat, leading her team back through the tunnels as explosions rocked the ground beneath their feet. The hub went up in a roar of fire and smoke, the blast collapsing passages and sending shockwaves through the underground network. Lena and her squad emerged into the forest, coughing from the dust, their faces streaked with grime and sweat, but their mission was complete. As enemy reinforcements scrambled to respond, Lena led her team on a grueling escape through the wilderness, navigating by moonlight, using every ounce of her training to keep them ahead of pursuit. For 2 days they moved non-stop, sleeping in shifts, eating on the run, Lena pushing herself past exhaustion because she refused to lose anyone. By the time they finally reached the extraction point, helicopters swooping in to whisk them away, Lena's body felt like it was running on fumes, her vision blurred from fatigue, but she didn't relax until every single soldier was accounted for, seated safely in the chopper. As the forest below disappeared into the distance, she leaned back, her rifle still in her lap, her eyes scanning the horizon with quiet intensity. She didn't smile, didn't celebrate, she simply breathed, steady and controlled, because she knew this victory, like all the others, was temporary, just another battle in a war that had no clear end. That night, back at base, she walked through the rows of bunks where her soldiers slept, her steps silent, her expression unreadable. She sat alone on a crate outside the barracks, cleaning her weapon under the pale glow of a floodlight, her thoughts drifting to all the battles that had brought her here. She didn't see herself as a hero, she saw herself as a survivor, someone who had endured hell and chosen to go back into it again and again, not because she wanted medals or recognition but because she couldn't stand the thought of anyone else bearing the weight she carried. And as the night wore on and the base settled into uneasy quiet, Lena sat alone, rifle in her lap, scars on her skin and fire in her eyes, ready for whatever storm would come next. The end.